Hi, I'm Andy Nosal, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and the Birch Aquarium, which are both located in La Jolla, California. And I'm really excited to be able to tell you about this amazing phenomenon that occurs just a mile south of our two institutions. And that's here at the southern ends of La Jolla Shores Beach, where every year hundreds, if not thousands, of leopard sharks come together in only waist-deep water. And those rather ominous-looking shadows you see lurking under the water, that's them. Those are the leopard sharks. And I know you must be thinking, right, if there were ever a time the cliche shark-infested waters would apply, it'd be here. But you'd be wrong. These waters are no more infested with sharks than they are infested with dolphins or seals or humans for that matter. At least the sharks live here. This is their home, and you can't infest your own home. But even so, we might call these waters teeming with sharks, and they have been for as long as anybody can remember. But we never knew why they were teeming with sharks. And understanding that question, why the sharks come to this spot, is what I set out to do for my dissertation. But it turned out that answering that question, why, was not so easy. And let me illustrate why. Imagine you're walking down a city street, and up ahead of you, you see a large group of people gathered. Natural curiosity, you wonder, why are all those people gathered? So if you care to know, you could investigate. You go up and try to see who these people are, what they're doing. Maybe they're all facing toward the middle of the group, in which case they could be watching a street performer. Maybe they're marching and holding up signs, in which case they're probably protesting. So you could look for these outward clues, or you could always ask them why they're gathered. Unfortunately, you can't ask the leopard sharks why they're gathered, and so you can only rely on those outward clues to figure out why they're there. So uncovering those clues is what I set out to do. So what did I do first? I had to get in the water with these sharks. I had to see them for myself. So this is actual aerial video footage of the sharks. Taken by a tethered helium balloon. So you see some paddle boarders here, and that's me right there, swimming with what appear to be a bunch of little tadpoles. Those are actually the leopard sharks that are all about the same size as me. Now, I wasn't always so brave just doing the backstroke with these leopard sharks. I can actually remember the first time I got in the water with these animals, and I was really apprehensive. The water was not so clear. It was actually very murky, and I remember the first time a shadow materialized in front of me and became a shark, and I was startled. But soon that fear, it just melts away into relaxation. I mean, you've got your face in the water, it's silent because your ears are full with water. All you hear is your breath resonating in the snorkel, and then you start to just watch the sharks slowly swimming by you. You then notice that all the sharks have a different spotting pattern that's as unique as a fingerprint. They're beautiful, beautiful animals. But as you watch the sharks more, as you watch them swimming, looking for these outward clues, you don't see any. They're not doing anything. They're just swimming. They're not feeding. They're not mating. They're not giving birth. They're not doing what you might expect a bunch of animals coming together to do. So the point here is that just direct observation wasn't going to be enough. And this was frustrating. So it sent us back to the original question. Why are these sharks here? But even more importantly, why does it matter? It matters because when animals come together like sharks, especially in an area like this that's so accessible to humans, I mean, look, there's a beach, there's people right there on the beach. When animals do this, they are extremely vulnerable to being exploited by humans. Imagine how easy it would be to just wipe all these sharks out with a big net. You could kill them all in one afternoon. Imagine how vulnerable all these sharks are being in this one spot if there were habitat destruction. It's like putting all your eggs in one basket. And so knowing where, when, and why animals like sharks come together at a particular site, it gives us the means, the most effective means to protect and manage these animals. So these sharks are really great because they're very special because they're only found on the western coast of North America. They're found nowhere else in the world. But even though their range spans from Samish Bay, Washington down to Mazatlan, Mexico, really the core of their range is in the state of California. And it's throughout the state that they form these hangouts, these aggregations. The La Jolla hangout is not the only one. But what's interesting about all the other hangouts that have been previously described, they've all been limited to sheltered bays, coves, and estuaries, which offer food and shelter. What's so neat about the La Jolla aggregation, or the La Jolla hangout, is that it's not in a sheltered bay, cove, or estuary. It's along a sandy beach on the open coast where there's surf. So here you can actually see the hangout. It's right inshore of that submarine canyon. And as I mentioned before, we've known about these leopard sharks for as long as anybody could remember, but they were only officially documented in 1950 by Scripps professor Carl Hubbs. He was a professor at the same institution where I got my PhD, which is why this was so special to me. And even more special was that I was able to find his original handwritten collection notes from that day, dated August 3rd, 1950, where he noted catching 3 large adult Triakis semifasciata. That's the scientific name for leopard shark. So he caught those in a beach seine at that very site. But even though Carl Hubbs knew about these sharks since 1950, we still didn't know why they were here. So again, that's what I set out to do for my dissertation work. So to get at that question, why are these sharks here? I first needed to know who are these leopard sharks, demographically speaking. And so after catching hundreds of these sharks and releasing them after we took their measurements, determined what sex they were, we found that all of these sharks are mature adults. Their average length was 1.4 meters. The smallest shark we found was 1.1 meters, and these mature at 1.0. So that's how we know that all of these sharks are sexually mature. But even more interesting, 97% of these sharks were female, which amounts, of course, to only about 3 in 100 of these sharks being male. So right away, we can exclude mating as a probable cause for this aggregation. If the primary purpose of this hanging out was mating, we would expect to see a more balanced sex ratio. We don't see as many males as we would expect otherwise. But not only are these sharks mostly female, they're also pregnant female. And we know they're pregnant females because we actually conducted ultrasounds on them. So here you see the snout and the mouth of a pup inside of a shark, inside of a mother shark. Here we have the head moving inside of another. Each of these female sharks, they give birth to litters that average 20 pups each. They're really, really cute. They're only about 8 inches long, about the size of a Snickers, and they're born live with all the skills they need to hunt. There's no parental care in sharks. So all of these sharks are pregnant females. So now we can actually amend our original research question from why are these sharks here to why are these pregnant female sharks here? So now we know who these sharks are. We need to look for more outward clues that will tell us why they're actually here. So we need to know what they're doing. We need to know what their movement patterns are like. So we need to track and follow these sharks. So how are we going to follow a leopard shark for 48 hours? That's really how long it takes to get a good feel for what these sharks are doing. We're going to have to put something on the shark that's going to allow us to follow them. And maybe you've heard of putting a GPS tag on a shark. Unfortunately, that doesn't work for a leopard shark because they never come to the surface, and the GPS signal cannot travel through water to get to the satellite. So unlike a great white, which comes to the surface, GPS is not going to work for us. But sound, acoustics, that's what's going to work because sound travels very well in water, and we can follow the sound. So what we did here is we caught 8 leopard sharks in the same way we normally do, using a hand line and a dip net. Once we have the shark secured, we're actually going to attach an acoustic transmitter tag, about the size of a AA battery or your index finger. And this transmitter, once it's underwater, it emits a pinging sound at a certain frequency that we can tune into and listen and follow. Also on these transmitters, there's a depth and a temperature sensor. So encoded in those pings is information about how deep the shark is, as well as what the temperature of the water surrounding the shark is. So we can get a lot of really fine-scale information from this. So then we release the shark, and once it's swimming, we have to follow that sound. Now, we follow the sound using a special device that's called a directional hydrophone. That's this device right here. It's like an underwater microphone, but it's only listening in one direction. And so it's mounted at the bottom of this rotatable staff, and so we can rotate the staff and therefore rotate the hydrophone to zero in on where the strongest signal is coming from, know that's the direction of the shark, and then proceed to follow the shark for 48 hours without interruption. So we're on that boat day and night. It's a small boat, only 17 feet long. There's no cover, there's no shelter, but there's always 2 people on, and we take turns, 3 hours tracking, 3 hours sleeping. And it's hard work, but it's the only way that we can get this kind of fine-scale data that tells us what these sharks are doing. So let me tell you what these sharks were doing. I'm first going to show you what these sharks did vertically in the water column. So what we have here is a very simple graph showing on the y-axis depth below the surface, in meters. And what you're going to see is that these sharks spent the vast majority of their time in very shallow water. In fact, 70% of their time was spent in the top 2 meters of the water column. But not only were they really shallow, for example, they weren't shallow and out here in the middle of the water, they were always very close to shore. They were often at and sometimes even inside the surf zone. And so now the question was, well, why are these pregnant females so shallow and so close to shore? So the first thing that we thought, well, maybe it was a way of avoiding predators. You can imagine if you're hugging the coastline, you've now eliminated one direction from which you can be attacked, that being from the shore. So that would make sense. The only problem with that is that the main predator for leopard sharks in this site is the male California sea lion, and it is, unfortunately for the sharks, very effective at catching these sharks, even when they're hanging out in the very shallow water up against the surf. So here you can actually see a picture of a male sea lion catching a leopard shark. You think sea lions are cute and cuddly? Not when they're hunting. They actually grab these leopard sharks just underneath the gills and thrash them around above the water with such force, it actually eviscerates them. All their internal organs come out, and the sea lions eat only those organs, and they leave the rest of the shark, which just washes ashore. So pretty grisly, but that's life being a leopard shark. And so getting back to our question, why they're shallow and so close to shore, it doesn't seem like that strategy really helps them avoid predators. So there's got to be another reason for this conspicuous behavior. So the other thing that we thought of, well, maybe these pregnant females are selectively occupying the warmest available water. So in the absence of any point source of warm water to which these sharks might be attracted to, for example, a geothermal vent, or a river outflow, or a power plant effluent, none of which are present at this site, then the warmest water is going to simply be near the surface due to solar insolation. That is, the sun's rays beating down on the surface and warming the water from the top down. But not only is the warmest water near the surface, but it's going to be close to shore because of the prevailing onshore breeze in California that is just blowing the warm surface water shoreward and piling it up in the surf zone. And this is exactly where the sharks are hanging out. So it does seem that they are occupying the warmest available water. And all of this points to the fact that these pregnant females are likely incubating their developing embryos. They are shortening the gestation period. The gestation period is already 10 to 11 months. And so you can imagine why these sharks might want to make that as short as possible. So it's almost like, because these animals are ectothermic, it means their body temperature is the same as the surrounding water temperature. The warmer the water is, the warmer their body temperature. And then the faster things like cell division and growth happen. So those pups are growing faster when the mom is in warm water. So it's like a mother bird sitting on her eggs to keep them warm and maintaining that optimal temperature for development. But if that's the case, if the sharks are just near the surface and close to shore to get to warm water, why that particular spot in La Jolla? Couldn't they do that anywhere? And the answer is no. It has to be at this spot, and let me show you why. So I've showed you the vertical movements. Now we're going to look at the horizontal movements. So if you remember, the aggregation spot is here, and we have that submarine canyon right offshore. This is where our actively tracked sharks, the ones that we followed, spent the most amount of time. This is what we call the home range. This is where they spend 95% of their time. And this is the core area, where they spend 50% of their time. Sounds like a smaller number, but look at how much tinier that space is. So their movement patterns are much more concentrated here. So now we have an idea what the sharks are doing horizontally. Now let's see why this site is so special. I'm going to superimpose a map of wave height over the home range and the core area. So now if you look at this graph right here, warm colors like reds and oranges, that corresponds to high waves, very large waves. And then the blues and the greens, those are small waves. So look at where the home range is. It's kind of nestled in this area of low wave energy, small waves. And we think that's important for a number of reasons. And the reason that there is small waves right here, it's because of the shape of the canyon. As the swell propagates and it passes over the canyon toward shore, the wave energy actually gets diverted away from the canyon head where the sharks are, producing the small waves here and large waves here, which is why if you're walking down the beach, you'll see surfers here, but not down there where the sharks are. And it's not because there's sharks there, it's because there's no waves. So having small waves seems to be important for two reasons. One, if the waves are very gentle, it is a lot easier for these pregnant females to most easily access the warm shallows. In other words, it's much easier to get warm and shallow if there's small waves than if you're being pummeled by big waves. So if you have a choice, why would you be here if you could be down there? The other reason this is important is because there's less wave action. It means that um, there's less wave mixing with the deeper, colder water. And so on average, this area where the sharks are, it's about a degree or two warmer than any of the surrounding areas. Again, may not seem like a big difference, but if you have a choice, be in the warmer water. So all of this is pointing to this idea that these sharks are incubating, they're developing embryos. But as great as this site is, they're really only here during the day. At night, these sharks actually leave the hangout spot, and I'm going to show you what one shark did just as an example. So take a look at the map. This is what the shark did during the day. So we've got these yellow lines spending all of its time meandering in front of the canyon. The sun goes down. Now look at what the shark's nighttime movements are. Going into the canyon, offshore. But by sunrise, it's back at the hangout spot, and it resumes its normal daytime behavior. So the sharks leave, they go into the canyon at night. Well, we wondered, why leave the aggregation site? Why leave the hangout spot to go into the canyon? We figured they were most likely feeding. And in the canyon, the best food source would be market squid. Very small squid, about this long, 8 or so inches. At night, these squids spawn in the shallow reaches of the canyon, but then at night they retreat, or during the day they retreat back to very deep water where they wouldn't be accessible to the leopard sharks. So to test whether these sharks were actually feeding on the squid, we had to do a simple diet study. Now in the past, to do a diet study, you'd have to kill the animal and cut open the stomach and see what was in the stomach. But we didn't want to do that to these leopard sharks because people like leopard sharks. So we wanted to use a non-lethal method called gastric lavage. And this is what that looks like. We actually insert a PVC tube into the shark's stomach, flush the stomach with seawater, and then invert the shark and allow gravity to do the rest. Gravity just pulls out everything that was in the shark's stomach. We catch it with a spaghetti strainer, and look what we found. Mostly squid. There were some other things too. They've got pretty good taste. There's other fish, there's crabs and lobsters, octopus, but squid were the most important. So now we had direct evidence that these pregnant sharks were leaving the aggregation site at night, going deep into the canyon to feed on squid. So another good reason to hang out at this spot. So just to recap so far, who were these sharks? Mostly mature, pregnant females. Why are they here? They seem to be attracted to the exceptionally calm and warm water of that spot in La Jolla, which is due to the offshore submarine canyon. And just icing on the cake, there's got to be food somewhere, and they don't have to go too far to get it. At night, when they're hungry, they go down into the canyon, feed, and then they can come warm back up in the morning. So the pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but there were still some outstanding questions, namely, when exactly are these sharks here during the year? Are they here year-round or only for a portion of the time? Do the same sharks return every year, or are these all just transient individuals? And lastly, where do the sharks go when they're not at the hangout spot in La Jolla? So to answer these longer-term questions, we now had to amend our question. Instead of how do we follow a shark for 48 hours, how do we follow a leopard shark for more than 3 years? Now, I wasn't going to be following a shark around in a boat for 3 years, so we needed to think of a better way to do that. And so instead of actively following a shark, we're now going to be passively listening for the sharks with those acoustic pinger tags. So this kind of acoustic tracking is called automated acoustic tracking, and it differs in a few ways. So let me show you how that works. We caught sharks as we did before, but now we needed more. 19 sharks we caught for this purpose. We bring them onto the boat and we put them onto their backs. This induces a phenomenon called tonic immobility. It's almost like a state of hypnosis where the shark goes to sleep, and it's what we use for anesthesia. Now, we need anesthesia because we have to actually surgically implant the acoustic pinger tag into the shark's body. You can't put the pinger tag on a shark on the outside and expect it to stay on for more than 3 years. It's going to get caught on a rock, it's going to get tangled in kelp, or so much stuff is going to be growing on it. So the only way to be sure that the shark stays tagged and therefore trackable is to surgically implant it. But you do see that it takes only a very small incision, about 1 inch long, and we actually coat the tag, the pinger tag, in beeswax, which is a natural product, and so there's less of a chance that the shark's immune system is going to recognize it as a foreign plastic body and try to attack it. Then we suture up the incision, and off the shark goes. We release it. This whole process takes only 5 to 7 minutes, and we had 100% survival. Now, once the shark is released, as I said, we're not going to actively follow the shark. We're now passively listening to it. So instead of a directional hydrophone, now we're going to be using an underwater omnidirectional hydrophone that's listening in 360 degrees. So that's what this black device is right here. It's about 1 foot long, and they're all mounted to these underwater moorings right here. And so each of these has a detection radius of 300 meters, or about 1,000 feet. So every time a surgically implanted shark swims within that distance of the acoustic receiver, the receiver records the time, the date, and the code for that particular shark. So over the course of 3 or more years, we know exactly which sharks were present where and when. And every couple of months, we have to scuba dive on these receivers and download the data with a special Bluetooth upload cable. Now, we had 7 of these receivers up and down the coast of San Diego County. Of course, we had one in La Jolla, and I'll just zoom in here to show you how that one was positioned. It was positioned so that its detection range, that 1,000-foot radius circle, encompassed almost the entire home range. So if the sharks were hanging out in La Jolla, we had a really good chance of detecting them at that receiver and therefore knowing they were there. But we also had receivers spanning from the U.S.-Mexico border all the way to southern Orange County. And this was to see if the sharks really preferred La Jolla and how often they were detected at other places along the coastline. Now, over the course of the more than 3-year study period from July 2009 until September 2012, we had over 750,000 detections at these receivers. A lot of detections. We really put Excel to its limits with these. So what I want to show you now is the main trends that we were able to extract from all of these raw data. So the first trend, the first conclusion, is that these pregnant females exhibited strong daily fidelity to the La Jolla hangout spot. In other words, they were detected more often in La Jolla than any other site. So here's what we're looking at. We're looking west here, right? We have all of our receivers. We have La Jolla right here. On average, they were detected 288 of their days at liberty, which was more than 10 times more than the next most frequented receiver, which was here in Dyke Rock. That was only a mile or so north of La Jolla. So very strong preference for this particular site, which shows us how important this site must be for these sharks. But not only did they show strong daily fidelity to this site, but strong annual fidelity. In other words, it was the same sharks coming back year after year. So let me show you what this looks like. We have the 4 years of our study from 2009 until 2012. We tagged 12 females in 2009, another 7 in 2010, and here's how many sharks returned to the La Jolla hangout spot after the first year. 14 out of 19 total, so about 74% returned after year 1. Now we're going to go to year 2. We're going to lose a few more sharks. Maybe they got eaten or caught. Maybe they went to some other place in California. But still, we've got 10 out of 19, so over 50% came back consecutively in 2 years. Now what's really amazing is that even 3 years, now we can only really focus on 2009, where we had 12 sharks. We had 6 out of 12 of these sharks return, 50%. So 50% of these sharks are returning consecutively year after year after year. And these numbers are likely underestimated because we know that at least 2 of these sharks were captured and killed by fishers and therefore didn't have the chance to return in subsequent years. And it wouldn't be surprising if more sharks were also captured but simply not reported back to us. That has happened before. So these numbers are high. So they're coming back day after day and year after year. Now I want to spend the rest of the talk talking about these 6 females, the ones that returned in each of the 3 years of our study. Now, I'm going to be showing you the full detection records for each of these sharks. And I want to show you what just one of these looks like right here. This is for one shark. Each one spans 24 hours from left to right, and over 3 years, the length of the study period, from top to bottom. And let me zoom in just to kind of show you what this looks like. So again, spanning 24 hours from midnight to midnight, and then each line going down is a different day. Again, starting at the time of tagging in 2009 down to the end of the study period in 2012. And every little black pixel you see there is a detection made at that receiver in La Jolla. So wherever you see black, it means that the shark was detected at the La Jolla hangout spot. And right away, just to illustrate how you can look at these graphs, you see that there is a clear difference. The sharks are present more often between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. That's consistent with what we found with the sharks leaving the hangout spot at night. But even so, even though you see those daily, the daily patterns, you can also see seasonal patterns. So now I'm going to put in the other 5 sharks that we're going to be focusing on. So I'll let all those come in. So if you look from top to down, right, which is what we're going to be doing for the seasonal patterns, you can see that there are times where the sharks are present, then they're absent, then they're present, then they're absent again. There's this amazing synchrony where they arrive and leave sometimes within days or hours of each other. And we can distill these data down into the following graph. So what we have here on the y-axis is the average number of unique females detected in La Jolla per day, and these numbers are averaged in 24 half-month bins from January all the way to January. So what you notice is that there is a clear seasonal pattern where we have this high season from June through December. And this is really interesting because this occurs after the known pupping season for these sharks. So leopard sharks give birth somewhere between April and May. And if you remember, I said before that they have a gestation period of 10 to 11 months. That's longer than a human, which is of course 9 months. What I didn't say before is that these sharks give birth every single year. They have an annual reproductive cycle. So if you do the math, they give birth in April and May, but then in order to give birth the following April and May, after a 10 to 11 month gestation period, there's a very narrow window after they give birth, only a month or two, where they can recover and then mate. So by the time they arrive at the La Jolla hangout spot in early June, they're already they have already mated, the eggs are fertilized, and they're already in the early stages of pregnancy. And what was really amazing is that the seasonal variation in female abundance in La Jolla was strongly correlated with sea surface temperature. So whenever the sea surface temperature rose, the number of females arriving at the site to exploit those warm waters also rose. In fact, this variable alone explained 86% of the variation in female abundance. Just one variable alone could explain that much. So you can see this is all pointing to the same conclusion, that these pregnant females are likely attracted to the warm, calm water here to incubate those embryos. So I want to start to wrap up my talk here talking about what we didn't quite figure out, and that is where the sharks go when they're not in La Jolla. So again, they're mostly there in June through December, so where do they go in the winter and spring? So here's our study area. All those yellow dots are our receivers. So in La Jolla, what we found was that about half of our tagged females, they went north along the coast, and we actually detected them sequentially at each of these receivers. But even when they went past the San Clemente receiver, we still had a chance of detecting them. And you see all of these red dots up here? These are other receivers that are operated by a different lab, a lab at Cal State Long Beach. And they're the same receivers. We can share data and collaborate. But what's really interesting is, even though our sharks went north, the receivers up near Los Angeles, they never detected any of our leopard sharks, which means one of two things. Either these sharks are overwintering somewhere south of Los Angeles, or they're transitioning offshore outside of range of those little red receivers in Los Angeles, and either going north, which we have no evidence of, or perhaps out to Santa Catalina Island. You see there's a little red dot there. There was one receiver there that detected 2 of our leopard sharks the first winter, and then those leopard sharks came back to La Jolla the following year. Unfortunately, because this was not our receiver, we didn't have any control over when it was out, so it was only there the first year of our study. So we don't know if in subsequent years leopard sharks went to Catalina. So that's something that remains to be seen. But only half the sharks did this. The other half just disappeared from La Jolla. They were not detected anywhere else by anybody's receiver. And it's still a total mystery where those sharks went. But what's really neat is that the sharks that just disappear and then they come back the following year, those same ones disappeared the following year. The ones that went north and came back, they went north the following year. So almost these two different behaviors where they're all meeting in La Jolla in the summer and fall. So we're finally going to answer this question this year, where these sharks go. We're going to be attaching very simple pop-up satellite tags to these sharks and program the tags to disconnect from the shark and float to the surface. Once they're at the surface, then the GPS signal can be transmitted to a satellite, and then I get an email, open it up, and I see exactly where these sharks went in the winter. So finally, we're going to figure this out, and I can't wait to tag these sharks and then figure out where they go. So to come full circle, why are these sharks here? These are pregnant female sharks. They appear to be attracted to this hangout spot in La Jolla because of the exceptionally calm, warm water, likely to incubate their developing embryos. Again, like a mother bird sitting on her eggs to keep them warm. And again, just icing on the cake, there's a lot of food nearby. They don't have to go far to get the food that they need. And then why does it matter? It matters because we have shown how absolutely essential this spot is to the leopard sharks, how irreplaceable this site is to the leopard sharks. They spent so much time here. And just to put that into perspective, let me show you the following maps. So here's our study area. Here's La Jolla there. Those yellow circles, those are the detection areas to scale, right? If we zoom out to our study area, those yellow dots, they're still to scale, but look at how tiny they look. These seemingly insignificant pinpoints along an entire coastline where they could go, where the sharks could go. If we zoom out to our regional level, to Southern California, you can't even see those yellow dots anymore. And then again, just to make the point, if you remember, these sharks are found all the way from Washington State down to Mazatlan, Mexico. They could go anywhere along the coastline, but yet they come back to this tiny little spot every single year. So we are so lucky, well, the sharks are so lucky that that spot, that so important spot, is protected by a no-take marine reserve, a place where you're not allowed to fish for them. But I say these sharks are lucky because that reserve, when it was established a few decades ago, was not to protect leopard sharks. It was to protect abalone. The leopard sharks just caught a lucky break. What about all the other hangout spots in California and Mexico, for that matter, that are not protected? Again, these are the leopard sharks in La Jolla. Can you imagine if these sharks were not protected? How easy it would be to catch these sharks. And I gotta say, something has changed from the first time I got in the water with these animals. I just saw them as sharks. Now I see this video, and when I get in the water, I see them as pregnant moms, as pregnant female sharks. So now think about wiping all of those pregnant females out. You're not just killing the adults, you're killing the next generations, and maybe multiple generations, because those pups are going to grow up. They're going to have their own pups. So you could wipe out these animals in a very short period of time. So it's absolutely essential that we protect places like this, where animals like sharks come together. And especially for sharks, which are absolutely essential for the environment. They're top predators. They maintain balance in the ecosystem. We have to protect these animals, especially given the fact that they've been here for so long. There's geologic evidence where there's fossilized leopard shark teeth in geologic deposits that have been dated 120,000 years before present. That's 10,000 leopard shark generations. Wouldn't it be a shame if after so long we would wipe out these sharks? So we need to keep these around for future generations of humans to appreciate and enjoy as well. So with that, I would really like to thank all the people that have contributed to this work over the last 7 or so years. Most of them have been undergraduate volunteers that have given their time to me, spent many long hours on a boat working with these animals, but also my colleagues and my advisors over the years who have helped me. And I want to thank you for your company and for tuning in. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me at that address. Thank you very much.